had a magazine for the Newsweek from 2007.
I remember.
Yeah. And it had the gentleman with the suit, and in his hands was just like green leaves. And on the big, bold, white letters, black backdrop, it said Little Green Lies. And it was about, at that time, just what's a renewable energy credit?
Welcome to the Active Energy Podcast, featuring conversations shaping the future of energy. Every episode will feature a conversation between energy professionals on the topics and questions that are at the forefront of the global energy market. Did you know that by the year 2020, the cost of conventional energy and the cost of renewable energy will converge? Renewables are no longer just a nice to have or a secondary thought. Renewables are taking center stage, becoming a larger part of the energy mix, helping to reduce a business's carbon footprint and also save a bit on their bottom line. In light of this ever-growing and expanding renewables market, we're joined today by Schneider Electric Energy and Sustainability Services VP of Global Content and Cleantech Marketing, Amy Haddon, and the VP of Sustainability and Cleantech Services, John Hoekstra, who are here to shed light on the current renewables market and help to give a Skeptic's guide to renewables.
So I thought it was interesting in perspective how many companies we saw that were still at the early stage journey of renewable energy buying. I think sometimes like we've reached the mainstream, right? But I found that even when it comes to RECs and other instruments, that a lot of companies are still fairly early stage in their journey. Would you agree?
Yeah, I was struck by that too. I mean, it was what was really neat to see is just sort of the pace and level of conversation around renewables, I think, is at an all-time fever pitch. It's all-time high, at least in my, decades worth of experience. So that's really neat to see. And I think one of the reasons is, and a realization for me was that, a lot of folks just really want to figure out where to start. So whether it's, the pre-conference workshops to a quick start to renewables to just hallway conversations that I had, it was pretty neat to see. I mean, I think we're at this, people are thinking about it mainstream now, and I think to adopt it mainstream, that's where sometimes you have to step back and say, what are the fundamental options that are out there?
Right. What can I really do? And I keep thinking there's a ceiling somewhere on the market, but it doesn't feel like we're there, right? When we're talking now about being on pace or exceeding the procurement that we saw in 2018, it's astonishing.
Yeah, it was funny. We just moved office spaces here in Louisville. And so I was packing up all my things. And when I was packing everything up, I had a bookcase of things I haven't probably never read, but certainly not lately, right?
Yes.
And so I'm going through packing those up. And I had a magazine for the Newsweek from 2007.
I remember.
Yeah. And it had the gentleman with the suit, and in his hands was just like green leaves. And on the big, bold, white letters, black backdrop, it said Little Green Lies. And it was about, at that time, just what's a renewable energy credit? What is it? It's a piece of paper. It's fiction. It's this and that. And I think since that time, RECs and other things have had this stigma of maybe being a buying your way out of.
I think so too.
This,
a greenwashing
this
instrument.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think the reality is it's not that, at least certainly from my point of view. EACs and RECs have always had a place, right? And a lot of times it's because they allow to jumpstart the investment in renewables. And so long as they have, the standardization, the verification behind it, which there's great tracking programs and structures in place today, it's a very viable instrument for advancing, renewable energy commitments. And heck, all the standards, whether you're talking CDP or RE100 or whatever, they all recognize it. So, it has a very worthwhile place in the currency, if you will, of renewable energy, in my opinion.
Well, and to your earlier point, an offsite large-scale PPA is not going to be the right instrument for every company, right? Yeah. And so to really consider the portfolio of options that you have available, the geographic locations in which you have operational load, the goals that you've set as an organization, like, feels like all of that is a multi-layered evaluation that is required to really determine what's the right ramp to get you to where you want to be.
Yeah. And, I've sat across the table from, I mentioned RE100 or CDP. I've also been in contentious discussions with Greenpeace, with folks in the IT and data center industry. This is back when the Clicking Clean campaign and things like that came out. And, the external stakeholders are always going to have their view. And sometimes it takes a lot to change that view. And my guidance to companies has always been, if you can stand firm behind your commitment and the approach you take to make that investment, and you feel good about that story, you feel good about that message, and that's right for how your organization can get involved and get started, that's positive progress. And so for me, it's always a challenge when you see things out there that sort of, I don't know, there's backlash or whatever. And, I think we're past the point of where people are doing things just to try and get the goodwill and get the good story. There's enough peer-to-peer validation that anything, just moving the needle forward is what we need.
For sure. Plus, if you weigh the economic upside that some of these instruments convey, potentially, certainly the ability to manage power prices in a volatile environment, but also those reputational benefits that folks are getting in the marketplace from doing the right thing that aligns their operations with expectations around climate science and carbon reduction, or circularity, or whatever it is that's really driving them from a shareholder and a stakeholder perspective. It feels like there's more opportunity than anything else for companies these days.
Yeah, I'd be interested in your thoughts on this, Amy, because one of the cool things sitting in last week was the sheer volume of participants in particularly some of the sustainability breakouts, where there's a lot of conversation around science-based targets, what to do post 2020, and thinking about these pretty big audacious goals that are being set out there. And, EACs are going to have to be part of that. But did you run into folks, kind of sitting in those sessions? And I'm always fascinated by what you think.
Yeah, I think, well, it was hard because I wanted to go to all of our sessions. The one that I sat in on, though, that was really a very intentional choice for me was around Scope 1, talking about the future of renewable thermals, of transportation, of how we're going to get our arms around that particular classification of emissions, particularly in light of the fact that right now the Science-Based Targets group doesn't accommodate the use of carbon offsets to address those emissions.
Yeah.
And it was very interesting, I think, to hear both some stories from the field, from our clients that spoke there, but there was also a lot of momentum in that audience as well. I think that as we look ahead, it feels like we're starting to get our arms around, electricity emissions.
I feel I have like the electricity train's rolling, right?
It's
Renewable
rolling.
Electricity, there's clarity, there's products, there's things you can go out and do. Thermal's a challenge.
It's a challenge. Yeah. And I feel like, well, as you and I have lots of conversations about this, supply chain being really the next frontier, I think, for a lot of companies, or for leaders in the space like Walmart, who have been doing it for 10 years now, sort of how they're going to accelerate the ability of those suppliers to not only meet their own goals, but to really take aggressive action on carbon reduction to meet those buyers' goals as well, like Project Gigaton, for example. So I do feel like the conversations have really started to expand outside of how we manage our purchased electricity emissions. Although, as we were just saying, there's still plenty of people coming into the market. But I do feel like the next frontier really is, how do we now start to address those more difficult emission categories? Or, even beyond that, how do we start really thinking about water as the next frontier? And even, of course, I love to talk about how water and energy are linked. They can't be separated. So I do think that it's a real challenge, particularly when we start looking at aggressive targets that are going to really require deep and significant action on the part of our clients and the companies that we work with to get to that commitment that they've made to a science-based target, it's a game-changing conversation.
Yeah, and it's being in this field for a while. It's heck, going back to that Newsweek cover, right? It was just all about basic understanding and trying to figure out
for sure
what is sustainability, and now to see it really moving into, we're using science. Really, I mean these commitments that company, and it's one of the reasons I enjoy Schneider Electric the way I do is because we're also we're making these commitments,
right.
And
we're figuring it out.
We have some idea
That's
how
right.
to get there, but it's certainly not all clear. So yeah, it'll just be interesting to see. So I think going back to what we were talking a little bit about earlier, it's really just getting started, right? How do you get started? How do you begin? And I think I've seen it in a couple of different ways, and you probably have too. Or really, it's two choices. One is you go out, you think about a strategy, you make a target and goal, and say, "All right, I'm going to go get it." The other way is you start by doing some things and say, "Okay, this has some legs under it. We're saving some money. We're getting good customer stories, etc." Now we have the confidence to go out and put together a goal or a target, and so I've seen it work both ways.
Yeah.
I don't know if I don't know if one way is better than the other.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of conversation around that, I think.
One of the great comments I heard at that event was someone said, we weren't thinking about this at all, but then our CEO went to Davos and called us from Switzerland and said, we have to start looking at renewables. I thought, wow,
probably
that's the
ran
power
into Jean-Pascal Fourqual.
That's right. That's the power of the network to start to make things happen, The other interesting topic that I think surfaced, and that certainly you and I have been doing a lot of work around this year, is how this falling price environment for renewables means that suddenly they're competitive from a price perspective. And, I don't know if you've had more thoughts in terms of how we're seeing those offers evolve in the marketplace.
Yeah, it's even the falling price is one for some of the, pricing for solar under $1 a watt now. Where I remember when it was $8-9 a watt,
right.
And people were still doing deals out in California where there are certain incentives, and now at that level, especially at some of the larger scales, we're talking anything over a megawatt to 5 to et cetera, it's competitive against conventional electricity pricing. And that's when natural gas is still at such a low, and that has a big impact on what the grid power price is that for renewables to be competitive at this stage is really something else. So, I think capitalizing on some of that, finding where that is, that's one of the things that's really just driven a bunch of the activity, right? It's just the economic sense.
If you could look in your crystal ball with the PTC really shuttering, the ITC coming down, do you anticipate that just technology costs will remain low enough to keep projects competitive? If you could look out a couple of years.
I think it's going to be tight, to be honest. I think technology can make up some of that gap. I think it's a little bit tougher. Well, I won't say a little bit, but the PTC is tougher simply because it's starting to ramp down now, right? And so in my discussions and with developers and others in the market, certainly technology can make up some of it on the wind side. I think the financing structure is going to be a key role. Pretty much, what are lending rates going to be? How can you do structured debt or equity financing at more competitive rates and maybe be willing to take slightly lower returns than would have been there over the last couple of years? I think some of that's going to be needed to keep kind of the momentum moving forward. But where there's a will, there's a way sort of thing, right? I think it's a little bit different because this is looking like the last time, at least for the U.S., with the PTC, where previously it had been extended, and where there was a will, there was a way before. I think that's still going to be the case, but it is challenging the market to really re-strategize a bit.
For
and
sure.
I think, right now solar isn't quite so hard because the ITC has a little bit more runway in the way that that's structured and the ability to take on that tax credit. But certainly in the coming years, as that begins to sunset as well, that similar sort of challenge is going to be there. And so it's whether it's those technologies improving, new technologies coming in, I think more real-time response of being able to leverage your distributed assets to, whether it's an on-site solar, a battery, a fuel cell, whatever it is, to perform at times of varied, up and down pricing in the marketplace. That sort of flexibility, I think, is going to be the next frontier of how to even better leverage some of those renewable assets. And that's where some of the sort of continued financial opportunity is going to be.
Though, I got to come back to that Newsweek cover, because despite that message, 10 plus years ago now, companies still invested in renewables. I mean, they still drove the market that enabled the rise of the corporate PPA, even though they were paying a premium, So I don't put it past any of our customers to develop that will and to be influential. And certainly I think if you look at someone like Fifth Third Bank, they're on my mind because they're about to cut the ribbon on their solar project this week. They really went all in, but they went for a project that was, localized to a lot of their operations, and they've taken a great deal of pride in that work and really have shown themselves to be leaders in that space. And I think that can't be underestimated for many of our customers, that the ability
couldn't agree more.
To have that not only reputational but economic leadership is really a value.
Yeah, and not to go all political on this, but I mean, at cocktail parties or what have you, I'll get the question, what happened? What happened when Trump got elected? And it was refreshing to see, what may have been the thought that a lot of this is going to slow down. I think it's actually magnified, because I think a lot of those, whether it's Fifth Third or other corporations, have really taken the leadership role, saying absent sort of regulatory or compliance requirements to go do things, we're going to go out and do it, So heck, we've got Target, T-Mobile, and Brown-Forman, similar sort of thing, about to start up here in a month on sort of a combined huge wind project that they did. And I think it's that type of leadership. I mean, heck, we mentioned a few there, but there's, over 100 that we've worked with at least.
It's amazing, isn't it?
On PPAs. That leadership is just, it's going to continue.
Yeah.
And so.
And in new geographies, right? Obviously, we're seeing a ton of growth in the European market, Australian market, Latin America. It feels like it's only a matter of time before these solutions are really available.
I just hope
everywhere.
I hope my body clock can keep up with some of these trips.
You've been logging some miles.
Yeah, exactly. So, but yeah, I mean, all over Europe, Asia, Australia, just South America's, you're looking at potential corporate PPAs returning in spots like Chile and otherwise. So, it's going to continue to be a challenge in certain spots, but yeah, the opportunities are there. You just kind of have to dig for them a little bit from time to time.
So, coming back to how we started this conversation with, new entrants to the market, I think it can be hard for companies, especially I think seeing all the activity that's happening in the market, maybe comparing themselves, saying, well, we're not a Walmart, we're not a Google, we're not a Target. I've been thinking about how can we suggest to companies that they get started. Obviously, our Neo network is a great platform for them to explore that. With all the great tools that we have in there, like our strategy calculator and others. It's a great source of market intelligence, and our team supporting them from the perspective of the expertise and experience that we have. Other thoughts, though, that you would say to any new entrants in terms of where to begin? Part
of it's thinking through some of that. I think part of it is just peer-to-peer networking, and sort of that's what was great about last week at Perspectives is a lot of conversations of, gosh, where do you start?
Yeah.
That was a lot of the conversations there. There's certainly things like the Neo network that can help on the peer-to-peer, right? Because creating environments where you can talk to someone who's been there before, you can share best practices, all that sort of thing, and then have the information out there of what are the different options. I kind of go back. I talked about the two ways of getting started. You build a strategy and then go, or you do some things and then build a strategy around it. It's a little bit chicken or the egg. I think it's just some courage to make that step.
I think that's true.
I think it's just the courage to say, you know what, we're going to go do something. The economics can be there. We don't have to go do anything if the economics don't show up in the end. But I think part of it is with all of the chatter, the things that you're seeing happen, even companies way down in the supply chain that we see are about to sign on the line for, a new solar project or a PPA or whatever. We're seeing folks that I wouldn't have expected just moving that forward. And some have said, hey, the NEO network was a great place for me to get started. So that's certainly an option. A lot of great organizations out there, right, to help kind of get that moving. I think a lot of it is start with a success story, take a look at your portfolio. I think you'll find one. There's something there. There's a diamond in the rough or whatever you want to call it. And it's just going to take a little work on it, right? It doesn't just, doesn't fall out of the sky per se, but with a little bit of work, it can be pretty easy to convert into something to jumpstart the process.
Well, and most of our clients aren't experts at this, right?
Right.
You and I know, having done this for a long time, it's a complex and ever-changing marketplace.
Yeah, there's some days I feel like I know a good bit about it. Other days I feel like, I feel like I'm a little bit behind. I got to catch up a little bit. That's just the truth in a fast-paced market like that.
It's really true. Yeah, but what I hear you saying sort of is the main takeaway is, to get started, to get that intelligence that you need and screw your courage to the sticking place and go for it.
Yeah, it takes a little bit of courage and risk in the way of just, we're going to go do this.
Yeah.
And some leadership. So.
But clearly lots of maps now for how to get there.
That's right.
Yeah,
That's right.
That's right.
That's right. It's a road that's been traveled before.
That's right. Awesome. Thanks,
All right.
John.
Thanks, Amy.
Thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of Active Energy, a podcast from Schneider Electric Energy and Sustainability Services. We hope that you'll join us again next week as we tackle the topic of extreme weather and the effects that it has on energy procurement. We'll look at the steps you need to take to build a strategy to be ready in case of an emergency. Be sure to share on social media with your friends and like-minded people. If you could, leave us a review on whatever platform you're listening to us on. Follow us on Twitter at @SchneiderESS or on LinkedIn and Facebook by searching Schneider Electric Energy and Sustainability Services. We're also starting a LinkedIn group specifically for listeners of the podcast. It's a great place to interact with peers and to continue the conversation from the podcast. There will be exclusive content featured there from time to time as well. Until next time.